Welcome to Crash Landing. My name's Steve, and every episode I'm going to be guiding an intrepid explorer as they crash land on an alien planet. They have 1 hour to choose the 5 books they couldn't live without on their brave new world.
Warning, ship crash landing. You have 60 minutes to enter the archives and recover significant cultural artifacts. Authorization required. Identify yourself.
Hi, my name is Tasha Suri, and I'm the author of Empire of Sand, which is an epic fantasy set in a world inspired by Mughal India, and it follows the story of a girl named Meher, who is the illegitimate daughter of an imperial governor who has secret powers that she accidentally reveals, and ends up tangled in the nefarious plots of an evil, cultish imperial figure, as you do. And I have another book coming out set in the same world called Realm of Ash, in November 2019, wow. Which is this year.
Not long now.
Not long. I'm not going to think about it.
Okay.
It's all...
It's too stressful.
Too stressful.
Okay. So, unfortunately, I am going to have to crash land you on an alien planet. But the good news is you get to take 5 books with you that you get to read, in theory, forever. So, that's the good news in this terrible scenario of life and death, and survival. So, tell me what your first book is and why you chose it.
My first book is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. And I picked this book because I love it, obviously. That's kind of the answer for all of them. But yeah. But also because I love it for all the wrong reasons, and it gives me a perverse satisfaction to enjoy it for all the reasons that people tell me I shouldn't enjoy it.
What are those?
So when I was a kid, I read Jane Eyre, and everybody was like, oh, very good. She's reading a classic. Very, very good. Not realizing, of course, that I was never going to read any more. And I was told, don't bother with Wuthering Heights. It's just a novel for teenage girls. They just really enjoy the unrealistic romance, which is really unhealthy. And you shouldn't read it because it's just silly people being absolutely silly and unrealistic. So, of course, then I had to read it. And I love how, for anyone who doesn't know, the book is about, is a story told to a not very nice man by a woman who I think we're meant to assume is nice, in the Yorkshire moors, about the tragic events that happened to a particular set of families, the Earnshaws and the Lintons. And it follows the story of Cathy Earnshaw, and how she falls in love with the, this child that's brought into her house by her father, who, is she related to him? Is she not? I don't know. I don't think they ever make it clear. Called Heathcliff, who then turns up and ruins her marriage, and then she dies, and it's all very tragic and ridiculous. And yeah. But essentially, the romance is full of miscommunication. It's supremely unhealthy. Nobody's nice to anyone. At one point, different characters will say things like, well, I hope I die and ruin your life by dying because that's all you deserve.
Wow.
And it's just super messed up. It doesn't acknowledge that it's super messed up at any point. I mean, there is one point in the novel where everyone's, I think, having a meal, and Heathcliff says, of course, I thought I would come back and kill your brother and then kill myself, but then I met you and I decided not to bother, and nobody bats an eye. And and I just love that. I love that it's unhealthy and ridiculous, and everyone is awful, because honestly, in real life, everyone is ridiculous and awful and unhealthy. So it just feels really beautiful, and I enjoy the fact that other people probably would judge me for enjoying those very aspects about it. And if I'm stranded on a desert planet, then I want to read something that is going to upset non-existent people, I guess.
It always interested me that you've got these 3 sisters writing these books in a period where they can't really write fiction under their own names, so they're all doing under male pseudonyms and being published under male pseudonyms. And you've got the other 2 sisters writing stuff that are quite different, as you say. And then you've got this one, and this is the only book that she wrote, and it's so kind of brutal and brooding and kind of discordant compared to lovely romance and, what people call as a classic.
I just think that, Jane Eyre is pretty messed up too, but it's very moral. So you have a lot of, it ends with I think she talks about Jesus and heaven right at the end of the book, and people always forget that because it's not as interesting as what happens in the book.
Yeah.
So there's a really strong moral bent to the books by the other sisters, Jane Eyre and Agnes Grey, I think is the other one. Nobody ever remembers what she wrote.
No.
Anne Bronte. No, Tenant of Wildfell Hall and Agnes Grey.
Okay.
No, I think. Okay, no one needs to correct me on this.
No.
But Wuthering Heights doesn't care about morality at any point. No one is good, and even the ostensibly good character, the servant that narrates the story, does things that result in death. So she doesn't tell the truth to her master in one case, and that means that another character becomes really ill and dies, and she has strong opinions about certain things, so she won't say things when she should. And even though she tries to put herself in a good light, literally everyone is horrible. And there's no justice. It's great.
You're attracted to the darkness.
I am.
That's why we get on.
Yes.
So I've actually been to the Bronte Parsonage Museum in Haworth.
Oh my God.
Yes.
What's it like?
So I used to live in Yorkshire, and it's one of these things you go, oh, we'll go at some point. We'll go at some point. And before I moved away, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go. So we went for the day, and Haworth is on a massive, built on hills, and you climb this huge hill, then you get to the top, and you see the parsonage. It's now a museum, but obviously was their house, and you get to walk around the rooms and stuff. To be honest, the house isn't nearly as big as you think it's going to be. It is interesting, and the scenery are obviously on the way to Haworth is so barren and so featureless and so kind of just not desert, but you can imagine someone being lost there and just having to use their imagination or to conjure something from it. And it's just got this, as you say, this windswept aspect to the whole of the place. And then you come to this really posh, lovely house at the top where the three sisters are all scribbling away in their own, their own rooms and stuff. So it's got a great sense of history, and it's worth having a look around if you're into the Bronte sisters. But yeah, an interesting place for sure.
Oh, I'd love to go there. Admittedly, I don't know why I haven't. I think I should go. Yeah. You've convinced me.
Maybe one day.
Yes.
But it's worth. Yeah. If you're really passionate about it, and you have chosen this, so.
Yes. So I must be fairly passionate because it's 1/5. Yes.
Of everything you're going to have to read,
Exactly.
Yeah. So do you think this book, in a way, inspired your own work?
My characters are largely much nicer people. And it's a failing on my part. I always try and, write how love conquers all. I think I was inspired by the intense focus on emotion, and often really messy emotion. And it's probably given me a kind of enduring love for slightly batty women and brooding men. Though, to be fair, the brooding men in my stories don't strangle dogs as a general rule.
Good, yes.
So I think that's kind of like the bar you can't cross.
Yeah.
You can be an assassin, absolutely fine.
Yep.
Possibly a slightly, morally grey tyrannical figure, but dog killing takes you over the edge.
Well, it's like in any kind of film, you have a villain that kills hundreds of people, but if you hurt an animal, oh no, that's where people draw the line. You just can't do it.
You can't.
A friend of mine, they love the book, but they complain about the person who kills a cat. They're like, oh God, that's an awful moment. And like, hang on, there are worse things than the book. Yeah, but they killed a cat. And that's all people want to say to her. It's true.
You can't kill the cat.
You can't hurt animals. Even if it's a fictional cat in a fictional book, you can't do it. You just can't do it.
No. That's no.
See?
Yeah, no, I'm not happy about that. What's the book?
I don't want to get into trouble, so I won't say. Okay.
I'll ask later.
Okay. So, tell me about your second choice, and I'm more familiar with this one. It's an interesting genesis of this book, but tell us what it is, and then we'll talk about it.
Right. My second book is Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. And I'd love for you to talk about the genesis of the book, because it is really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. So from what I understand it, he originally started working on it as a TV series, and at some point Lenny Henry got involved in the process. I'm not sure quite how, and the two of them were writing it for TV for the BBC. And at the same time, he then started writing the novel version of it. He was able to put stuff back in that they had to cut for timing or they couldn't do for filming reasons. So in the TV series, they moved the market somewhere else because they couldn't get the permit to film in Harrods, which they're going to do. So when he got to do the book, he's able to put it back into Harrods, and like little things like that. Mm-hmm. And then they released, and he added other bits and pieces in, and then he released the book, I think around the same time when it came out, like 96 or something.
I'm not sure, to be honest. Yeah, I think it's such a not weird, but it's quite an interesting way for a book to come about, to start as something made for television. I think you can feel that when you read the book as well, because it feels very cinematic.
Yeah.
Everything's quite visual.
So when did you first read it then? Tell me that.
I read it probably at university. I think it was in my first year of university, because it must have been, because the thing that really annoyed me about Neverwhere is I bought a copy, I loved it, and then I immediately lost the book. And that's happened to me 3 times. So, and which is kind of fitting for Neverwhere. Because it's about, people falling into London below or London under London. And I'm convinced that's what keeps happening to my copies. I should just get it on my Kindle.
Yeah.
But what I really like about it is it takes the familiar and makes it strange. So in Wuthering Heights, I love that everything is just weird in its own way. But Neverwhere, you start off in what feels like the real world or real London, and it's really grounded in what London is like. And then it goes strange. But it's still London. Mm-hmm. And I'm really tickled by having an angel called Islington, because there is the angel at Islington and the Blackfriars and the Seven Sisters. And it's just nice when you're in London kind of going around and thinking, oh, of course, the Seven Sisters like Seven Sisters. And I know it's a very shallow connection, but it just brings me a lot of joy.
Yeah, yeah. And I was thinking about this. I wonder if this is one of the earliest works of urban fantasy that has been produced. Because urban fantasy now is a huge genre within the kind of fantasy space. But this book and the TV series came out in 1996, and that's 23 years ago now. So I wonder if this is, if it's not the earliest, it's one of the earliest examples of urban fantasy.
I really don't know the history of urban fantasy well enough to kind of to say, but I feel like Neil Gaiman is very tied up with that really specific kind of fantasy, contemporary fantasy, if not just urban, because you get that in Sandman as well, where it feels really rooted in our world, but our world made weird.
Yes.
And I don't mean like chthonic weirdness, just weird.
Yeah, because Dream is very peculiar. And all of his family.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's kind of familiar, but he is.
Strange families.
We've all got them.
So are you a fan of Gemmell in particular? Gemmell. Are you a fan of...
Yes.
Yes. Are you a fan of Gaiman in particular?
Yes. I mean, it's odd because I think, like a lot of fantasy fans, I've read a lot of his work and I've really enjoyed it. But whether I think of myself as a specific fan of his, I don't know. I used to, but then I think I've kind of gone a bit hipster and he's too cool now. So I'm just like, I liked him before he was cool and now it's not cool anymore. So I don't want to like him. But I do.
He's an odd duck as well, because as both of us are writers, he's kind of someone who never really does the same thing twice. And I can count on one hand the number of authors who can actually do that with their career.
I mean, I would be very happy to write the same thing constantly, to be quite honest. And I think a lot of authors, especially, jobbing authors who need to make an income, will often write very similar things because they know their audience wants it. They enjoy doing it. As somebody who reads a lot of romance, I see that a lot as well. Some of the more successful authors will have series that essentially play with the same themes or the same kind of character interactions over and over again. And that's good and okay, and I really enjoy it. But it's fascinating to see the way he plays around with things. And I think it's really brave as well, because to do that in your career is always a risk, no matter how big you get.
Yeah. To just say, no, I don't want to do another one in that series. It was a standalone. I'm going to do something completely different. And if it's that popular, the publisher's obviously going to say, "We'll do another one," and he goes, "Nope."
Yeah, very odd. And I mean, he could have definitely made a sequel to Neverwhere. It's got that kind of that whole idea of London having this magical side, and nefarious figures and a bit of a romance. All of that could play out over multiple books, a bit like the Rivers of London series does, I think.
Yeah, Ben Aronovich.
Yeah, but obviously Gaiman decided not to do that.
I mean, he's talking about revisiting American Gods, and he's been working on a sequel for that, I think. But that's like 25 years old now, so it's not as if he's rushing to do sequels.
No.
It's not. I don't expect the trilogy to complete at any time before I'm 70 or he's 70.
No. Oh, the temptation to make a George R. R. Martin joke here, but I won't. I'll be good. I know. Controversial.
So is this a book that you've read more than once then, Neverwhere?
Yes. Yeah. If I love a book, I'll read it quite often. I actually haven't read Neverwhere for a good few years now. Maybe that's a good reason to take it to my desert world. Because I'll enjoy it again, because it'll feel a bit new.
Yeah, a bit fresh after a gap.
Yes.
There are certain books that I will just come back and reread. Even though I kind of know them inside and out, I still get something from them. And I love being in that world, and that's the only way you can do it. So,
what's one of them?
For me,
if you don't,
Dune by Frank Herbert.
Oh, that's a good choice.
I think it's probably my favourite science fiction book ever. I absolutely love it. The books, in my opinion, the quality declines as they go on. And the third one is good, and the fourth one, I just can't get past that. But that first book, this is the other thing. There's always a book that an author is known for most of the time, and that's the one that everyone that going back 50, 70, 80 years, they know them for that. But of course, they've always done a bunch of other stuff as well that no one knows and no one's read about. And this was just something clicked. All the bits of his personal interests and everything clicked in the right way at the right time. And then Dune was born, and it was just this perfect blend of so many ideas he was playing around with. And yeah, I've got a beautiful version that I bought from the Folio Society just to have it as shelf porn. It's hardback slipcase with special paintings that were done for the cover for the version. Absolutely gorgeous. I'm never going to actually read that copy. I'm going to look at it. I'm going to flick through it. I'm going to read my crappy dog-eared bent paperback version. That's what
You're making the right decision. You're making the right decision. But yeah, I mean, Dune is it is a very perfect book, and it's another one that I read young. Probably younger than I should have, but I remember loving it because I didn't really get on with sci-fi. I didn't feel like it was accessible, and it really, I don't know what he did, but he made his world a world you could walk into and understand in a way that I think is a really gorgeous trick that not all fantasy and sci-fi authors have a perfect knack for.
Yeah, and Gaiman's really good at doing that, whether he's doing a story in a graveyard or you're walking through America and you meet all these strange characters that just don't fit in. But this, I don't know, he's so good at character. I think that's one of Gaiman's absolute strengths, that he creates likable and very unlikable characters that you can still root for.
Yeah. And there's something kind of almost Dickensian about them as well. I mean, his villains, I almost feel comical caricatures in a way, but they're so sinister that there's nothing funny about them.
Yeah.
I think the real appeal of Neverwhere is that it does feel like real relatable people in a world that's almost like ours, but is actually not like ours at all. And to take it back to the uninhabited world concept, I think you need that kind of weird mix of comfort and strangeness when you're stranded with no food and only books. Or do I have food? I don't know.
Well, it depends upon the world. It depends how.
Right.
We'll see about that. Okay, so tell me about your third choice. Now, this is a book I've not read, so I don't really know that much about it, apart from what I've kind of scanned about it today and a few days ago.
Right. Deathless is by Catherine Valenti. And it's essentially a fairy tale retelling I should never pick this book without checking how to pronounce names, but it's the story of Maria Morevna and Koshchei the Deathless.
Mm-hmm.
If I've pronounced that wrong, I'm really sorry. And it's a very famous tale in Russian fairy tale and folklore, which I didn't know at all before reading the book. And it mixes that with Russian history, recent Russian history. And you get this weird mix of politics and communism and hunger and war with this strange, heavily fairy tale-esque, or literally fairy tale, love story that is much like Wuthering Heights, rather messed up, but also involves life and death, literally animated, and Baba Yaga and the Firebird. So it's got a lot of ideas going on in it. But what drew me to it was I remember reading a quote from it on Tumblr, and it was just really, really beautiful. And I'm a real sucker for gorgeous writing.
Right.
I like it it's the only thing that will draw me into literary fiction, for example. If something's really beautifully written, I'll be like, okay, I'll give this a go. And Catherine Valenti is really good at beautiful writing. And it was, I can't remember the quote now, but it was something like, you will always be here. You will always watch her die. You will always lie in the snow with an arrow in your eye, or something along those lines, you know, very dramatic and goth. And I was like, I have to read this.
Sounds terrible. I must read it.
Yes. This list is saying things about me that I didn't know, but it's fine.
It's interesting, isn't it? When you do this. But yeah, it's always revealing. The person kind of goes, what?
If I tell you Addams Family Values was my favourite childhood film, I think you won't be surprised.
No.
Yeah.
And you loved Wednesday, didn't you?
I loved Wednesday. I wanted to be Morticia, but that hasn't happened yet.
Well, I've got the hide from Morticia, but not the legs.
Well, you can take the Morticia role. I won't steal it from you.
Thank you. But this is quite a new book. So this is 2011, Deathless.
Yeah.
When did you read it then? Only a few years ago, I guess.
When did I read? I must have read it in 2011 or 2012.
Right. Okay.
I read it in paperback. So it would have been probably 2012. Yeah, let's go with that. I have no idea. But I think the beautiful writing drew me in.
Yeah.
And it held on to me. And I've always loved fairy tales. And I've always loved kind of that magical, otherworldly thing. And I also quite like history. So it was really nice to have that kind of combination in one book. I think I'd enjoy reading it again and again, not just because of the kind of the plot being so heavy and full of stuff, but because it has a lot of ambiguity in it as well. So I've never quite managed to get my head around how the book ends. So the story follows this girl, Maria, as she marries Koshchei and lives in this otherworldly fairyland, and is told that there have been Maria Morevnas before her, and ends up leaving him and ending up in is it the siege of Leningrad, or have I got the city wrong there? That would be really embarrassing. I'm just going to Google it so that it sounds like I know what I'm talking about. So it is the siege of Leningrad.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, and kind of has to, and then you see the way that real history changes the way the fairy tales act as well. So it's got a lot of ambiguity in there, so that you can kind of read it over and over again and get different messages from it each time.
So it's a real mix of real history, but with Russian mythology woven into it.
Yes.
And is it changing the events?
The events don't change, but it's almost like the real history changes the fairy tales.
Right.
So you have these household spirits that you're meant to leave milk out for, or leave old shoes out for, so that they'll keep the house nice.
Yeah.
Just to shorten it. And at the beginning of the book, Maria meets some of them, and they are acting differently. So the house is now, it used to be you'd have one family per house, but now, of course, everything has changed and resources must be shared. So there's lots of families living in this big old house that once belonged to Maria's family. And it means they have lots and lots of household spirits all in the one house. And they have a meeting of comrades where they discuss how resources must be shared out and talk about the importance of the nation. So it's like politics suffuse or like leak into the fairy tale unreal world and change it from the inside.
Yeah. It's got parallels with some of Gaiman's work, of course, with American Gods, with changes in the real world affecting the gods and how they have to cope with changes in society.
Yes.
Updating of technology, people moving from one country to another, and the erasure of history as technology moves on and society advances and stuff.
That's a really good connection between the books as well. I mean, and I think it connects with Neverwhere too, because it's that sense of things that are familiar being changed by things that are sort of subconscious or live in our sense of what isn't real. That doesn't make any sense. What I mean is we have like a shared consciousness of fairy tales and folklore or ghost stories or horror. And if you take those out of their little space that they live in and you put them in the real world, it makes the real world really weird, but it also means that they interact with each other.
Yeah, yeah.
And I like that in Gaiman's work, and I like that in Deathless. Not so much true of Wuthering Heights, which is just weird all the way through. But it's a nice little connection.
Yeah. I always like the idea that a lot of this stuff is just going on just out of sight, and all you have to do is turn the right corner and you'll stumble across something. I mean, there was a film I'm watching, I can't even remember what it was. It was years ago, and it's the first time I'd seen it, and turn on the television, and a guy's walking down the street, everything seems really normal, and he turns a corner, and there's something like 2 orcs in the street stabbing someone, and it's like a normal film, and I'm just like, what? And so's the character, and I can't even remember what it is now, but it's that kind of a thing where you're just walking down the street, and then you're like, wait, what's that? And then there's, a hobbit on the floor or something. It's just that thing of suddenly the impossible is right there staring at you whilst you've got your iPhone going,
See, that I love that, because I really kind of wish that would happen. And I think there is a wish fulfillment thing in there, right? That you just wish that the unreal stuff really was there or could happen. I mean, to be fair, London is pretty weird anyway. I mean, did I ever tell you I walked in on a witch's coven once?
No.
To be fair, it wasn't a cult shop, so it wasn't that weird.
Okay.
But I was out to go see, I think, Hampton Court or something like that, and there was like a pagan-esque shop which had like different things in the window, and I thought, let's go in, because I like to go in and see that they have statues of Hindu gods and get irritated about it, then leave. So
of course.
Of course, it's just a hobby of mine. So I went in and we just started having a look round, and the lady at the counter looked really irritated to see us. And in the time that we were there, about 5 or 6 different people came in and sat in a circle and just looked really uncomfortable that we were in there. And I started to realise that they were trying to prepare for their coven, and my presence was interfering with their coven prep, whatever that may have been. So I left. But I did think, if you're going to meet and, consort with the spirits of the night or whatever it might be, you might want to close your shop.
Mm-hmm.
But perhaps that's not good for business. I don't know.
It sounds a strange thing to do on a work day. Do you not, do it, close early one day? Do it then?
Yeah, that'd be reasonable. Or do it at a full moon or something. Yeah. But, for all I know, they could have been otherworldly beings who were really irritated that I walked into this shop I shouldn't have been able to see or something. And then I just toddled out and, got to be part of something fantastical for a moment. But then, of course, I just think, it's London. Of course there are people who are witches in a shop meeting to have a coven. This is just what happens here.
Yeah. It's like when people do stuff in Los Angeles or strange stuff. People don't blink, because it happens every day that it's become so uninteresting, because they just go, oh, someone's doing a film. Yeah, whatever. Okay.
Oh, that seems fine. I mean, in Los Angeles, I bet somebody could dress up as an orc and beat somebody else up, and they'd just be like,
Yeah. Are you doing the new Bright film? Oh, right. Okay. or I think they even make fun of that in one of Anne Rice's books, or when they did the film of one of them, and he's doing all the vampire stuff, and they're going, oh, great wire work, I can't even see it, yeah. And he's flying around the stage, and you're like, yeah, okay, sure. Because that's what people would do. They'd just go, oh, yeah, great, yeah, wire work and CGI and blah, blah, blah. And of course, that's what it is.
Was that Queen of the Damned?
I think so, yeah. It's not that he's actually a vampire flying around the stage under his own power. No, of course not.
I have to just say, that movie is one of my favourites because it's so ridiculous.
Yeah.
The idea that this ageless vampire would be like, all I want to do is be a rock star.
Mm-hmm.
Of course he would do that. That's the only reasonable thing to do.
It's true. It's crazy. Anyway. So, right, let's move on to your fourth book. And this was an interesting choice. I was not expecting this. Having read the others and getting a feel, I read this one and just thought, what? So tell me what it is.
Okay. It's The Little White Horse by Elizabeth Goudge. And it is, I think it was written during World War One or two. You know, that.
First published in 1946.
Thank you. I'm glad one of us knows. It's a children's story, and it's about a little girl whose name I've completely forgotten. That's good. I only read it recently. Whose father dies, and then she is sent to live in the tiny town of Moonacre, which is by the sea somewhere, with her family and with her uncle, and discovers that she is, quote unquote, the Moon Princess. And she needs to try and reunite the people who live by I think the original book calls them the Black Men, and that was changed because, for obvious reasons, who live down by the sea with the people of the village and make up for the mistakes of her ancestors, all the while having picnics with a lion, and there's a unicorn and a boy that she dreamed about once who just turns up, and there's lots of descriptions of food, basically. I think that covers it.
So this is a children's book that's now quite old. So how did you come across this one, and how old were you when you first read it? Was this like an early library discovery when you were little?
No, when I was little, my godmother had lots of books that she was given when she was a little girl, and she gave me a few books. She gave me Little Women. Fun fact, the Little Women she gave me was an abridged version or had the end ripped out because I never knew that Beth died because
Spoilers, God!
Sorry. If you haven't read it now,
really old, but anyway.
Yeah. So she gave me a bunch of books, and she gave me The Little White Horse, and it was this really beautiful hardbound old edition with like hand painted art in it. And I have no idea where it is, and I'm really miffed about that because it was gorgeous. And I read it in that, so I had no idea how old it was, and I only knew it was old. And I had no idea when it was written or whether it was popular or not or anything at all. So I read it as a kid, and I loved it, and I kept it for years and years, and I used to reread it over and over again. And I think what I love so this book has some really regressive race and gender stuff, which I think is true of a lot of books of that time. So let's put those aside for now.
Yeah.
And I'll say what I loved about this book is it just felt really, really magical. And it has these beautiful descriptions of food and place. For years after reading it as a kid, I was enchanted with the idea of what this little girl's room looked like. Because when she gets there, she has a room with a very dainty door. Everything's described as dainty. That only she can get through because she's so small, and her ceiling is covered in moon and stars, and she has this beautiful canopied bed, and it's all plain stone around her, and it's all kind of silvery, and she has a little box full of sugar cookies, and I didn't know what a sugar cookie was. I didn't realize it was just a normal cookie, so I thought it was a special one. And it was just really, it was like, I don't know, it was like property porn for a 7-year-old. And I just really loved all the descriptions and how beautiful the whole world was, and it really enchanted me. So it felt like reading fantasy, geared towards my age group at that time, but I still think it's really beautiful.
Yeah, because it's not something I'd heard of, and given its age, unless it had been in my local library, I guess I wouldn't have stumbled across it. But do you think this is one of the first books that sparked your interest in fantasy and the fantastic?
I think it did, actually, yeah. It, as I said, it has some really regressive politics, but it also had lots of women in it.
Yeah.
And it had some kind of gentle romantic ideas. It had the idea of a family curse that must be atoned for, which is very fantasy. It had the idea of evil that can be redeemed, and it had a unicorn, for goodness sake. and it just has a lion wandering around that everybody thinks is a dog. And when this girl points out that it's a lion, everybody says, oh, well, we didn't want to say that it was a lion because it might upset people and they might get scared. And so it's quite weird and bizarre, and it doesn't feel like it really belongs in this world. Like when she goes to this village, she's gone somewhere else. Definitely.
Yeah.
But it does it at the right level for a kid, I think.
Did you ever read the C.S. Lewis Narnia books?
I did, yeah. Yeah. I cried when Aslan died. Spoilers.
For an old book again, but if you don't know that, where have you been?
But bless, I didn't realise that it was a Christian allegory till the last book, and then I got really annoyed. So I was doing well there. I used to really love The Horse and His Boy. I thought that book was amazing. Totally didn't get how racist it was as a kid at all. I spent a lot of time just not seeing the racism in things, which I think is quite impressive.
Yeah, well, I didn't realise they were a Christian thing until later either. It's just at that age, you're not reading it for that. You're not reading it to look for things. You're reading it just to enjoy the story and the characters and the world and go somewhere fantastic in your mind. Because when I was little, there was no such thing as the internet. I'm that old, yes. We made up our own fun with a stick and a ball. No. But you read and you create everything in your mind. You create these fantastic places, and the more colourful the book, the easier it was to transport yourself there. And things like Narnia, where you literally step through a wardrobe into this fantastical world, was brilliant. It was just like stepping through a doorway. I'm not looking at it going, oh, yes, well, that's a Christian allegory. Oh, yes, the resurrection. Clearly that's Jesus. Aslan. Not far. So you don't look for that kind of stuff. It's just, it comes later, I guess.
And I think when you're a kid, you also have a really different relationship with books. Like, to take it, again, away from The Little White Horse and talk about Narnia, I loved things like The Horse and His Boy, which is in this, sort of Middle Eastern-inspired world, because I read that book and I took what I wanted from it. So I thought, I love this world. I think it's so cool. And that's pretty much all I took from it. And I think now when we look at a lot of the things we love, we do critique them in a different way, and we do kind of rip them to pieces, lovingly, obviously, and sort of say, these are the themes and this is the message and this is what was intended in this scene. But I think when you're a kid, you read these things and you go, I like that. And that's it. That's all that happens.
Yeah, you're a clean slate, and it's only as you get filled up with more of this stuff, you start to look for something that's different, or you start to see the cracks, or it's almost, I sadly think, the more that the real world seeps in, the more that you then start to pick apart what's there on the page. Yeah,
and I think with a lot of fantastical worlds, I mean, in children's books particularly, but obviously in adult fantasy, they're all built on a bedrock of the real world in the end, or the politics or beliefs, or, the fantasy that the author has read before.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't necessarily notice that unless you're looking for it. I'm not sure authors always even notice that, and that's fine. And it can be quite disheartening when you see under the surface and you go, oh, it's all just wood and paper and some puppets on strings. Yeah, not to be depressing or anything.
But this is an exciting book and a lovely book about a little white horse.
Yes, it's really lovely. It's a very sweet story about the importance of being good and believing in Jesus, and basically, and there's lots of lambs, and there's this whole scene where the children give a mountain back to God because the monastery was stolen by the girl's ancestor.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very good book. Great descriptions of her mittens.
Right. Excellent.
I think what I really appreciate about the book is that it's on one level a really moralistic tale for young girls, teaching them not to be overtly femininely curious and to obey the teachings of the church. And on another level, it's a very loving description of all the food you couldn't get during rationing. Yeah, huge amounts of description about anything made of sugar or meat. And I think the author must have been hungry the entire time she was writing it. And it's also a very loving description of clothing and flowers, and it's very, very indulgent and sensory. So I kind of appreciate the clear struggle that the author was going through between the things she wanted and the things she thought were right. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but brought me a lot of joy.
Well, no, that's good. That's good. I'm glad that even now it's something that you can get something from. That was published so long ago now. I wonder if it's still in print, and I wonder if, if young people are still reading it today. I wonder.
I had a little look on Amazon, and it seems like it's a lot of older people sort of going, I remember reading this when I was... So probably not, to be honest.
That's disheartening. Maybe they should bring it back into schools, or they may have to change some things, but...
Yes, they might have changed some wording here and there, but I'm sure kids have better books now, don't they? They have their own books. David Walliams is writing children's books, I gather. So.
Yeah, he's busy with that. Anyway, tell me about your last book, and this is another one that I'm not familiar with either. Not too surprising, though, but tell me about it.
Are you saying you don't read historical romance?
I don't know what you're saying. I don't know what you're talking about.
Right, so my last book is The Suffragette Scandal by Courtney Milan. And it's the final book in a much longer series called the Brothers Sinister series, which is called so because there's a bunch of left-handed men in it, basically.
Right.
That's the reasoning that they're called the Brothers Sinister.
Okay.
It's a very flimsy reasoning to connect the books together, but I think that's kind of... romance just has to have a reason to connect books in a series, and that's the reason. That's what they've gone with. It's fine. But anyway, going back to the book, it's The Suffragette Scandal is the story of a woman who is a suffragette and runs a women's newspaper, and a man who is a trickster and a con artist and a forger, and he receives a message telling him that an old friend of his is in danger because his own long-lost brother is now trying to sabotage his old friend. So he comes to the UK and he meets this woman, and they end up trying to con each other over and over again, and then work together to bring down his brother, who is a very powerful man who is bent on revenge against this woman and against a bunch of other people. And that sound in the background is my cat.
Oh.
Yeah, she's very sweet. So it's a love story, it's a romance, but it's also about suffragettes and journalism, and it's about fighting the patriarchy, and about learning to love yourself after going through torture.
Wow. Okay.
It's a lovely book.
So this is, as you said, it's the last in the series of... I honestly had never heard of it before. I'm not really one for historical romance, or romance in general in novels all my life. So what drew you to it? How did you get into historical romance? That's probably a better question.
Just say why, Tasha, why?
No.
That's thing to say.
Your choices are your own. How did you get into historical romance?
So when I was a kid, again, everything goes back to that. I was told not to read some Mills and Boons.
Ah, you're rebelling against the system.
Yes, and I thought, I want to read these Mills and Boons, so I did. Really shouldn't have done it. Still did it. And I didn't really enjoy them, but then I would read anything in sight, so I just kept going. So I would read them in the library, I would nick them from my mom, who won't be happy I told anyone that she read Mills and Boons, but this is fine.
She'll never listen, it's fine.
No, it'll be fine. And I just really enjoyed historical romance because I enjoyed the kind of... It actually has a lot in common with fantasy because it's often ludicrous. It has no connection with real history. If you speak to historical romance writers, they will tell you that they have done a huge amount of historical research, and by and large they have. But the reality that they acknowledge as well is that there are not enough dukes for all of this stuff to be happening. And, everyone has much better teeth in romance than you would expect from that era. And it's a fantasy. It's a fantasy of a time. I mean, if you look at dukes and earls today, you wouldn't, right?
Yeah.
But apparently you would in this fantastical world. And so to speak. Yeah. And I really appreciated being able to fall into that fantasy, just like I like being able to fall into fantasy in fantasy. It's about stepping out of your world into something completely different. You may not love everything about it, but it is an escape from your reality. And what I love about all of Courtney Milan's books is that she takes that fantasy and she says, okay, we've all embraced this fantasy of what history is. Now I'm going to change the rules of what we've agreed on in this fantasy. So, dukes are meant to be attractive. Women are meant to want to date dukes. And she goes, no, I don't think so. Dukes were largely horrible, which is historically accurate, to be fair.
Yeah.
And she says, no, we're not going to have nice dukes. And if we have a nice duke, he's got to feel bad about being a duke. And she brings in things like just plain old suffragettes, which you don't really get in romance, by and large, and plays around with a lot of the tropes and does interesting things and gives you an empowering fantasy of what history might have been like, essentially. What I really liked about this particular book is it took this woman who doesn't really have any power, doesn't come from money, doesn't have huge connections, but she has a small inheritance, and says it's perfectly reasonable for this woman to use that money to go off and make something better for herself and for other women, and to then not die, which is quite rare.
Right.
And then, historically and in fiction. And also have a man who has a very complicated and difficult past and kind of deal very compassionately with his vulnerability. So, I don't know. I think I like books that do interesting things with characters, and she has a lot of compassion for her characters, and I really enjoy that. I just also really like watching the patriarchy get smashed, and this book gave me the opportunity to enjoy that.
It sounds like she's also a bit of a rebel within the historical romance thing, as you said. If she's turning things on their head, all the standard expectations and tropes of what you would get, and she's just flipping them straight away.
I think I'm being a little bit mean about historical romance because it has a huge amount of people doing really interesting things. And to be fair, a lot of the stuff I read when I was younger was kind of the stuff published in the 80s.
Yeah.
It's never going to be as ahead as some of the stuff you get now. But I think her books were the first ones that showed me exactly how wide-ranging and interesting historical romance could be. And romance has taught me a lot about reader expectation and also about what you can do with tropes and how you can turn them on their head while still giving someone a satisfying story.
Yeah. Okay, so now we come to the part where, unfortunately, you're going to have to crash land on an alien world, but you do get to decide what kind of a world you would like to live on. So what kind of thing are you thinking of?
Right, so I had to acknowledge when I thought about this that I'm not really going to survive anything. This is an exercise in how long I can survive.
Yes.
Because I can't light a fire. I'm not really good with shoelaces, if I'm quite honest. So unless I've gone like with a pop-up house,
Yep.
and enough tinned food to last the rest of my life, I'm doomed. So I had to think about within that scope, where would I like to go? Now, I quite like the idea of a Dune-like world, actually, because I'd get to enjoy, my book is all about, sands and deserts, so it'd be quite nice to be in a world that has sands and deserts.
Yeah.
Dehydration would probably kill me quite fast. But while I was not dehydrated, I would have enough light to read by. So that's positive.
Yep.
It would preserve my books for any future travellers because it's a nice dry environment. And then they'll go, people of the past really liked unicorns.
And romance.
Yes, romance, unicorns, London and Yorkshire. Yeah. Good luck to them. And if there are giant sand worms, maybe one will eat me and my end will be swift.
Wow, that went dark really quick. Really quick.
It's all about positivity within like practical, realistic parameters.
So you're not very good at sort of surviving on your own then?
God, no.
No. Without Wi-Fi, you're done in.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I guess I could have said I want to crash land on a world that has Wi-Fi, but I feel like that's cheating.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. Other people have tried to get around me with things, and I've had to be more strict from now on, I think.
Yeah, well, I haven't tried to get around you. I've just embraced that. So.
Well, I think that's good. You've stuck within the rules, and you've been eaten by a sandworm, probably. And,
Excellent.
Maybe you get transformed into spice and become some,
Yes.
otherworldly creature by being passed through the anus of a giant sandworm.
It's all I could ever have wanted.
It's a dream come true. For all
Absolutely.
of
I mean,
us.
my worst nightmare would have been, in Interstellar, that world that's made of giant waves.
Yes.
That's my worst nightmare. I saw that in, I think, like an IMAX, and it made me so nauseous. No. So I thought I'll go for the absolute opposite of a world with giant waves. Sand.
Sand. Just sand everywhere.
Yeah.
I don't know, it gets a bit uncomfortable after a while. Gets in all your clothing. Don't like it. Don't like the sand.
Yeah, well, again.
You're not going to last very long, so it doesn't
You're not
matter.
going to last very long, so it's fine. I'll just settle down, read my book, wait for death to take me. It's all good.
And wait for the end.
Yes.
A tragic end to a tragic story. Brilliant. Well, thank you for coming on, and thank you for telling us about your books.
Thank you for having me.
My thanks to Tasha Suri for joining me this episode. For more information about her books, Empire of Sand and a new book, Realm of Ash, coming out later this year, please visit her website, which is tashasuri.com. You can also follow her on Twitter at TashaDrinksTea. Thanks for listening, and if you'd like to support this podcast and all of the other podcasts on the Geek Syndicate network, then leave us an iTunes review or visit the website geeksyndicate.co.uk, and I'll be back next month with a new episode.